Have you ever said something and instantly wished you could take it back? A careless remark, a promise made without thought, a boast born of the need to prove yourself. These seemingly minor moments can fracture a relationship, tarnish your reputation, or pull you further from the person you strive to become. We live in a noisy world where everyone competes to speak, but few truly listen. That's why the wise do not seek to say more. They learn to speak less, and only when it matters. Stoic philosophy reminds us, strength is not in sharp words, but in the restraint to hold them when they do not serve. In this video, we'll explore 6 things a truly intelligent person, one who lives with reason and self-mastery, will never say, because sometimes vigilance is the highest form of eloquence. 1. I'm planning to, but never begin. There's a strange psychological phenomenon many of us have experienced. The thrill of sharing a plan or goal. It's like a rush of dopamine when we say, I'm writing a book, I'm starting a business, or I'll begin running next week. By merely saying it aloud, we feel as if we're moving forward, as if part of the goal is already accomplished. Though in truth, nothing real has begun. This is the subtle trap of false satisfaction. When we speak of our intentions, especially when met with praise, our brain registers it as a form of achievement. But that illusion robs us of the energy we should reserve for action. Stoicism meets this with cold clarity. Without action, words mean nothing. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Don't talk about your philosophy, embody it." This isn't a vague suggestion. It's a disciplined directive. Silence is part of the ethic of thought. Silence doesn't mean secrecy. It means knowing when to speak, and more importantly, speaking only of what has been proven through action. The wise don't announce they're writing a book until a draft exists. They don't boast of changing their life until discipline has become habit. They don't talk about dreams. They let outcomes speak. Speaking too soon not only drains our inner drive, but also binds us to others' expectations. Once plans are made public, we feel pressure to perform, not from within, but to maintain appearances. Action becomes a performance, not a choice led by reason. Stoic teaching reminds us, what is beyond your control should not control you. Others' praise, premature applause, or society's gaze, these are external things. A Stoic keeps their purpose private, nurtures it like a seed buried in soil, and waters it daily with discipline, rather than rushing it into the light for fleeting approval. A clear example of this can be seen in elite athletes. They don't talk about training hard. They quietly repeat movements thousands of times, day after day in silence. Only when they stand atop the podium do others see the effort behind the glory. That silence, that is their strength. Moreover, early talk of plans makes us more pliable than we should be. Someone announces they'll start eating healthy, only to be swayed by a casual, "Really? Why? Do you need to?" Just a few doubts can derail them. But in silence, as they shape their new lifestyle alone, no one has the chance to sow hesitation. The Stoic does not argue against doubt. They let transformation speak for itself. They know words carry no weight without action to anchor them, so they don't publicize their path. They focus on each quiet step. It's worth noting, not everyone who shares their goal fails, but most who fail once made it public too soon. And this reveals a simple truth. Speech drains will. Every word spoken steals a fraction of the energy that could have gone into the work itself. An engineer is not judged by the intention to build a bridge, but by the bridge that stands. A writer is not remembered for wanting to write a novel, but for the words that live on the page. A Stoic is not concerned with whether others believe what they might do. They care only about doing it. Keeping plans private is a form of self-discipline. It forces us to turn inward, to draw strength from within, rather than depend on approval or applause. And that is what builds endurance. When no one is watching, when expectations fall away, the Stoic continues because their actions are not driven by an audience. Silence also protects a plan from needless criticism in its fragile early stages, when it still needs shelter to grow. Speaking too soon is like exposing a seed to the sun before it has rooted and expecting it to bloom. In a world where everything can be posted in seconds, preserving a quiet space to grow is a rare and valuable skill. The Stoic chooses silence, not out of fear of failure, but out of respect for the process. They understand that things of worth require time to mature in silence. Finally, withholding plans guards us from misjudging ourselves. Free from external feedback, we remain clear-headed, able to adapt our approach with reason. Those who speak too soon struggle to pivot, having crafted an image they feel compelled to maintain, even when it no longer fits. In contrast, the wise act in silence. They are not bound by past declarations, and so they adapt, renew themselves, and move forward without needing permission. And that is why the truly intelligent will never say, "I'm planning to," because they understand intention is not enough. Only action, carried through to completion, is worth speaking of. 2. It's raining again. Complaining as if the universe owes you something. There's a habit many modern people fall into. Complaining is an unconscious reflex. It rains, we complained. There is traffic, we complained. Cold food, slow Wi-Fi, a difficult co-worker. Every minor inconvenience becomes a reason to grumble. But beneath each complaint lies a dangerous mindset, the belief that we are victims of circumstance. Stoicism teaches that every time we complain, we surrender control of our lives to something external. It weakens our inner strength and erodes our capacity for meaningful action, because the one who constantly blames the weather, luck, or others loses the clarity to ask, "What can I do in this situation?" The Stoic does not deny discomfort. They acknowledge reality. Yes, it's raining. Yes, there is traffic. Yes, the plan fell apart. But they stop there. They do not let emotion give rise to pointless words. They refuse to be dragged into the spiral of complaint because they know it offers no solution. Complaining is a kind of psychological dumping. It may offer temporary relief, but leaves behind long-term damage. It trains the mind to always seek fault in the external rather than adapt. Every complaint is a brick in the habit of blame, and over time, that habit turns us into reactors, not authors, of our lives. The Stoic chooses a different response. When faced with adversity, they don't ask, "Why is this happening to me?" They ask, "What lies within my control?" This is not denial of reality, but a redirection toward solutions. It's raining. Use the time in traffic to listen to a podcast. Flight delayed. Read a few chapters. Project postponed. Revisit the plan and refine it. To the Stoic, every obstacle is an opportunity, not because they enjoy hardship, but because they understand attitude matters more than circumstance. They cannot change the weather or other people's decisions, but they can always choose how to respond. The image of someone stepping outside and muttering, "It's raining again," is the symbol of a passive, resistant mindset. That person did not prepare, did not adapt. They simply reacted, and that reaction does not stop the rain. It only darkens their spirit. If every day begins with a complaint, then no matter how clear the sky, the mind remains clouded. The Stoic, by contrast, does not speak what is useless. They do not waste energy on words that change nothing. To them, complaining is not natural. It is indulgence, and indulgence is the enemy of self-discipline. Complaining also has a clear social effect. It spreads quickly and triggers a chain of negativity. In a group, one person says, "Traffic was awful today," and instantly another joins in, "Yeah, I was 30 minutes late. This place is terrible. The coffee's cold." And soon the room fills with grievance. But the Stoic does not fuel that chain. They remain silent or steer the conversation elsewhere, not out of false positivity, but out of understanding. Words carry energy, and negative energy, once released, corrodes the collective spirit. In the workplace, the habit of complaining can destroy the spirit of contribution. An employee who constantly blames their boss, co-workers, or company policies will soon become passive and disengaged. In contrast, someone who remains calm, refrains from complaining, and actively proposes solutions becomes a person others trust and to whom greater responsibility is given. Even in personal life, the habit of complaining fractures relationships. When someone complains constantly, those around them grow weary and distant. No one wants to be near a source of constant negativity. The Stoic understands this, and so they choose to speak less, listen more, and share only when their words serve to build, not tear down. Stoicism does not mean blind endurance. It does not call for silence in the face of injustice or pain. It calls for a clear distinction between speech that drives positive change and speech that simply vents emotion. The Stoic complains only when it is the first step toward improvement. Otherwise, they let it go. Letting go in this context is not indifference. It is deliberate acceptance. I cannot change this, so I will not let it make me suffer further. This is a higher form of self-mastery, when we not only control our actions, but also our attitude toward what lies beyond our control. One of life's hardest lessons is learning to be silent at the right moment, not when silenced by force, but when tempted to complain, yet choosing calm instead. That is when inner strength reveals itself. That is when the Stoic understands not every situation requires a response. Sometimes silence is the best reply. They reserve that energy for what matters: action, adjustment, adaptation, on growth. And it is this clarity that helps them live more lightly, not because life is easy for, but because they refuse to let difficulty dominate the mind. In the end, whenever we're about to complain, we should pause and ask, will this change anything? If the answer is no, then perhaps the wisest choice is silence, a deep breath, and the next step forward. 3. You're wrong. Shutting down dialogue to protect the ego. In any discussion, there is one simple phrase that can instantly suffocate the air of dialogue. You're wrong. 4 short words, rarely meant to seek truth, but rather a knee-jerk reaction of an ego feeling threatened. It doesn't arise from reason, but from the impulse to defend emotion and preserve self-image. Stoicism places self-mastery and reason above all, and one of the clearest signs of inner disorder is the reflex to dismiss others' viewpoints with blunt denial. When someone says you're wrong, they are not truly in pursuit of truth. They are simply asserting their own correctness. Stoic philosophy has no interest in winning arguments. Winning or losing is far less important than understanding. And understanding never comes from a defensive posture. To the Stoic, every conversation is a chance to learn, a space to explore new perspectives, not a battlefield to dominate. When we react with "you're wrong," we close the door to dialogue and reject the act of listening from the start. The other person feels invalidated, shut down, and unwilling to continue. The exchange quickly shifts from a search for truth to a clash of egos, where no one listens, only waits to counterattack. In Stoic culture, listening is a virtue, not to agree but to understand. The Stoic learns to remain silent at the right time, so as not to be pulled into emotional reaction. When faced with opposing views, they don't rush to contradict, but step back in thought and ask, is there any truth in what this person says? Marcus Aurelius once wrote in his journal, if someone can show me that I am mistaken, I will gladly change, for I seek the truth, and the truth has never harmed me. This is not a defensive stance, but a rational openness in its purest form. It is the foundation of enduring wisdom. The ego often refuses to admit fault, because it equates error with weakness. But for the Stoic, being wrong is not a personal failure. It is a natural part of growth. If something is incorrect, it simply signals a chance to understand more deeply. The habit of saying "you're wrong" often stems from a fear of being diminished, a fear of losing control or not being acknowledged. The speaker builds a wall to protect their stance, but in doing so they isolate themselves from ideas that could expand their understanding. The Stoic does not let fear dictate their response. They do not allow wounded emotion to shape their speech. Instead, they choose observation. When a contrary view appears, they do not see it as a threat, but as an invitation to reassess their own thinking. The ability to receive opposing views is a measure of wisdom. In group settings, those who routinely shut down others stifle creativity, connection, and openness. When people fear being judged wrong, they no longer offer suggestions or voice new ideas, and such a group will inevitably stagnate. In contrast, a leader grounded in Stoic principles will encourage dissent in the spirit of learning. They understand that an opposing view, if fully heard, may be the missing piece to a sound decision. They recognize that truth has no emotion. Only people have egos, and they choose to place truth above personal feeling. In everyday life, the way we respond to differing viewpoints reveals our degree of inner self-control. When a friend offers advice that doesn't quite fit, do you respond, "You're wrong, I don't need that"? Or can you say, "Thanks for sharing. I'll think about it"? Your answer shows whether you're reacting defensively or living in a mindset open to growth. The Stoic chooses words that build, not break. They don't recite, they inquire. Instead of saying, "You're wrong," they might ask, "Can you explain that further?" Or, "What experience led you to that conclusion?" Such questions preserve the dialogue and make the other person feel respected, making deeper conversation possible. Moreover, rejecting someone's opinion harshly can actually weaken your own argument. The more forcefully someone insists they're right, the more it often reveals a lack of foundation. Because when we rush to say "you're wrong," we are acting from instinct, not insight. Stoic philosophy does not deny the existence of false ideas, but its approach is to clarify, not condemn. It does not seek to win debates. It seeks precision, and only arises, he says, when all perspectives are brought to the table, analyzed objectively, and not clouded by emotion. The "you're wrong" mindset not only blocks external understanding, it also severs the path inward. For when we always assume we're right, we leave no room for self-examination. The Stoic knows truth does not fear scrutiny, and the wise do not fear correction. Not saying "you're wrong" doesn't mean accepting everything. It means choosing to slow down, choosing words that connect rather than divide. The Stoic asks questions, investigates the root of an issue, and responds only when the mind is calm. Because in a world full of arguments, the strongest person is not the loudest, but the one who knows when to remain silent, when to admit they were wrong, and when to honor the truth spoken by another. 4. I already know this, let me teach you. Boasting disguised as sharing. In daily life, there's a certain type of person who's easy to spot. They tend to turn every conversation into a classroom. Whatever the topic, they quickly jump in with a familiar line. "I already know this. Let me teach you." On the surface, it may sound generous, like a willingness to share knowledge, but beneath it often lies not kindness, but the urge to assert one's value through intellect. Stoicism sees wisdom not in the ability to lecture, but in the ability to restrain the ego when given the chance to show off. The Stoic does not value grand declarations. They believe true knowledge requires no display. It's expressed through action, a way of living, and the ability to lead by example. When someone says, "I already know this," they're not just claiming expertise. They are unconsciously invalidating the other person's experience. It can make the other feel inferior, dismissed, or disrespected. The follow-up, "Let me teach you," can unintentionally shift an equal exchange into a one-sided lecture where one speaks from above and the other must passively receive. In conversation, the goal isn't to speak impressively. It's to create space for the other person to open up. The Stoic understands this well. They don't rush to instruct the moment they detect a gap in knowledge. They listen, ask questions, guide gently, and only share when it's truly wanted, because forced knowledge is never real learning. Intellectual boasting thrives most in competitive environments, where people feel the need to prove themselves to be accepted. But in such places, humility becomes the true differentiator. The one who doesn't rush to speak, who doesn't interrupt to prove a point, is the one who is most often heard, because their words come from inner stillness, not from a need to stand out. When someone opens with, "I already know this," the conversation immediately shifts. It's no longer a dialogue. It becomes a lecture. This is especially harmful in close relationships, with friends, colleagues, or family. When one person is always the teacher and the other always the student, the relationship loses balance, trust, and a sense of equality. Stoic philosophy values action over words. Epictetus once said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." Likewise, it's someone who truly understands has no need to say, "I already know this." They live rightly, and that in itself becomes a lesson without the need for lectures. The need to prove one's knowledge is often a hidden sign of insecurity. The Stoic feels no need to convince others of their understanding, because knowledge to them is not for show. It is a personal duty. The more they understand, the simpler they live, the less they speak, and the more prized their actions. In the workplace, someone who constantly plays the teacher can stifle team openness. When one person says, "Let me teach you," at every problem, others begin to hesitate to speak up for fear of being judged or dismissed. Over time, they withdraw, stop contributing, and the group loses creativity, connection, and long-term growth. The Stoic never tries to dominate the room. They observe, reflect, and speak only when it truly matters. And when they do, their words carry far greater weight. They understand that the value of speech lies in its timing and measure, not its volume or flair. Even in education, the most influential teachers are not those who speak the most, but those who live by example. They don't need to constantly repeat that they understand. They simply live in alignment with what they teach, and students will sense it and change on their own. That is how knowledge is passed on sustainably, without imposition and without resistance. Boasting disguised as sharing often creates the illusion of helping others, but true help requires empathy, patience, and sensitivity to the other person's emotional state. When we interrupt to instruct without fully listening, we do the opposite. We dismiss their needs and feelings. A Stoic will always ask themselves, will what I'm about to say truly help someone, or just satisfy my own ego? And if the answer is no, they will choose silence, because sometimes silence is the most responsible response in the face of knowledge. When someone seeks advice, the Stoic does not rush to say, "I already know." Instead, they ask, "What are your thoughts on this?" They create space for the other person to reflect, to voice their own conclusions. In doing so, that person not only receives guidance, but develops independent thinking. And that is real help. The Stoic tradition does not reject the sharing of knowledge. It simply holds it to a higher standard. Sharing is not for self-affirmation, but for service. If what you say brings no real benefit, then it is better left unsaid, because every word carries weight, and the wise are deliberate in their use of it. This philosophy also instills humility in the pursuit of understanding, for the more one learns, the more they realize how little they truly know. And the truly wise are those who always leave room for surprise, for new perspectives, and for the possibility that they may be wrong. 5. It's not my fault. Dodging responsibility like a child. In unfavorable situations, the human instinct is often to look for an external cause, a failed project, blamed on a client changing requirements, a fractured relationship, because the other person didn't understand, a poor decision due to someone else's influence. And when confronted, the familiar response is, "It's not my fault." At first glance, this phrase may seem harmless, but in the philosophical depth of Stoicism, it reveals a clear lack of self-mastery, an evasion of responsibility, and a denial of agency. To the Stoic, this attitude is not merely weakness, it is one of the greatest obstacles to personal growth. Stoic philosophy centers on the one thing a person can fully control, themselves, not the weather, not other people, not circumstances, but their own thoughts, emotions, and actions. So whenever someone shifts blame outward, they are abandoning the only true power they possess. When a child breaks a glass and immediately points at someone else, it's a natural reflex to avoid punishment. But when adults carry that same reaction into life's challenges, they remain emotionally immature. They refuse to learn from mistakes, to self-reflect, and most critically, to evolve. The Stoic does not deny that many things in life are caused by external factors, but they do not dwell on who is to blame. They focus solely on their own response. When something goes wrong, they don't ask, "Who's responsible?" First, they ask, "What is my role in this?" That question alone marks a turning point in how one lives and acts. In the workplace, blaming others is a common, yet deeply harmful behavior. It destroys personal accountability, disrupts team cohesion, and breeds a culture of fear and avoidance. An organization where everyone tries to cover themselves after mistakes can never grow sustainably, but where individuals say, "That was my mistake, I'll fix it." Trust, transparency, and continuous improvement can thrive. Those who live by Stoic principles understand mistakes are assets of growth. The more willing someone is to own their errors, the more they can learn and adapt. They do not see admitting fault as a loss of face, but as a sign of inner strength and self-leadership. They know that a timely apology carries more power than 100 justifications. Moreover, blaming others or external circumstances does nothing to solve the problem. It only delays the possibility of positive change. When someone refuses to own their part, they lose the motivation to change. The mistake repeats, the lesson is missed, and growth is postponed indefinitely. Stoicism also emphasizes the distinction between responsibility and fault. Sometimes we are not entirely to blame, yet we are still responsible for helping resolve the consequences. The Stoic doesn't split hairs over who's technically at fault. They take action to improve the situation. For them, taking responsibility doesn't mean claiming all the blame. It means committing to the solution and the learning. The phrase, "It's not my fault," also reflects a passive mindset, one where people feel powerless to change their reality. Meanwhile, the Stoic, though we cannot control what has happened, we always control what we do next. That is the fundamental difference between those who act and those who merely react. In personal relationships, especially within families or marriages, the habit of blaming can quickly erode trust and connection. When one person is constantly focused on proving they are not at fault, the other is left carrying the burden alone. The relationship becomes imbalanced, unfair, and eventually collapses. By contrast, when one is able to say, "I'm sorry, I should have handled that differently," even if they weren't entirely wrong, that statement opens the door to healing. The Stoic understands this, and they choose to take responsibility as an act of strength, not submission. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, once wrote in his journal, "Don't avoid responsibility. Don't blame others. If it happened to you, it's yours to face and resolve." This spirit applies not only to leadership, but to everyday life. It doesn't create perfect people. It creates resilient ones. In education, children learn fastest by observing adults. A child raised in an environment where parents or teachers always blame the outside world, because the school is like this, because society is like that, because you didn't listen, will learn to deflect rather than reflect. But if they witness adults say, "I'm sorry I wasn't patient enough," or "I overreacted, I'll work on that," they'll learn to own their mistakes, take responsibility, and grow into resilient individuals. No one is perfect, but maturity doesn't come from avoiding mistakes. It comes from facing them and turning them into lessons. And the first step on that path is letting go of the phrase, "It's not my fault." The Stoic does not wait for others to accept blame, nor do they need a pat on the back saying, "It wasn't your fault." They simply face the moment and ask, "What could I have done differently?" And once they find the answer, they begin to change. Because within every failure, no matter how small or great, lies a truth about ourselves waiting to be discovered. And the courageous are those who do not turn away from that truth. 6. I promise, then forget by the end of the week. A promise, in its simplest form, is just a sentence, but in essence, it is a commitment between people where honor, trust, and personal character are placed on the line. When someone says, "I promise," they're not merely making a statement. They are building an invisible bridge from another's trust to their own action. In reality, however, promises are often made carelessly. "I promise I'll be on time. I promise I'll help with that. I promise I'll change." These words are spoken quickly, then just as quickly forgotten, sometimes within hours or even minutes. And what follows? A quiet erosion of trust in the heart of the listener. Stoicism sees promises as a clear reflection of internal responsibility. One who lives by this philosophy will not promise anything without deeply considering whether they can fulfill it, because they understand words without follow-through become a moral burden and cause lasting damage to personal dignity. When a person breaks a promise, they don't just fail to complete a task, they betray their own sense of honor. A broken promise is a silent deduction from one's credibility, stored in the memory of others. After a few such lapses, even a well-meaning person may no longer be trusted, regardless of how kind or enthusiastic they appear. Stoic philosophy insists that words must align with actions. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Let your words and your deeds be one." In a world where anyone can say anything, consistency between what one says and what one does is the clearest sign of character. Careless promises often stem from two main motives: to smooth over a moment or to leave a good impression. Both share a common flaw. They are driven by emotion, not reason. The person making the promise may not mean to deceive, but they lack the inner discipline to weigh their words. The Stoic does not let fleeting emotion govern their speech. When asked for help, they don't rush to agree just to please. They ask themselves, Do I have the time, the energy, and the ability to follow through? If not, they choose to decline honestly rather than agree falsely. An unfulfilled promise doesn't only affect the recipient, it also harms the one who made it. Each broken promise chips away at one's self-trust. They become hesitant, reluctant to accept responsibility, or trapped in avoidance, afraid of the very words they have spoken. Stoicism holds inner integrity as the foundation of character, and a core part of that integrity is keeping one's word, not out of fear of disappointing others, but out of respect for oneself. When someone consistently keeps their word, there is no need for explanations. Their actions speak for them. In the workplace, keeping promises has far-reaching effects. A leader who frequently fails to deliver quickly loses credibility. The team absorbs that habit, and soon the entire group becomes unreliable and undisciplined. In contrast, the one who keeps even the smallest commitments becomes a pillar of trust for the whole team. The phrase "I promise" carries just as much weight in personal life, especially in families, as it does anywhere else. Children are particularly sensitive to promise. When a child is told their father will be home early or their mother will attend the recital, but the adult fails to follow through, the lasting impact isn't momentary sadness, but a crack in the foundation of trust. The Stoic behaves differently. They do not promise unless they have already resolved to act, and once they have promised, they follow through at all costs, not out of fear of losing credibility, but because their own sense of integrity won't permit inconsistency. They live by principle, not passing emotion. It's also important to distinguish between making a promise and setting a goal. Saying "I'll try" is not the same as "I promise I will." A Stoic uses language with precision. They do not confuse desire with commitment. If uncertain, they say so directly. "I need more time to evaluate," or "I can't guarantee it right now." And that clarity is the true mark of maturity. A promise must also be bound by discipline over time. If one promises to complete something in 3 days, but sees no progress at day 2, the Stoic does not wait until day 3 to apologize. They reach out early, provide an update, and adjust expectations if needed. Because proactivity is part of keeping one's word. Failing to keep promises quietly damages one's credibility in dangerous ways. Others gradually withdraw, losing trust and expectation. A person may be highly skilled and energetic, but if their word can't be trusted, every other strength fades into the background. The Stoic understands that speech is the first spiritual act. Every promise is an invisible contract, unsigned, yet deeply binding. And once that contract is sealed with one's word, its fulfillment becomes a moral obligation, not a casual option. If circumstances change and a promise cannot be fulfilled, the Stoic does not evade the outcome. They take responsibility, speak honestly, and offer to make amends if possible, not to salvage their image, but to protect the transparency of the relationship and preserve the value of their words. Ultimately, a promise is not just a declaration of intent. It is a reflection of who we are. Each time we keep our word, we build a character others can rely on. Each time we break it, we dismantle a brick in the castle of our own credibility. For the Stoic, "I promise" is not a phrase spoken often, but when it is spoken, it is a commitment sealed by will, by action, and by honor. We don't need to be philosophers to live stoically. I believe anyone, whether an office worker, student, homemaker, or entrepreneur, can apply this philosophy to transform their life, starting with the smallest things. I used to be someone who promised too easily and forgot too often. Wanting to please everyone, I agreed to every request, promised to join every plan, but then I broke those promises, not out of ill intent, but because I lacked the capacity. And the most painful part wasn't disappointing others. It was losing trust in myself. Since reading about Stoicism, I've begun to change. I've learned to pause for a few seconds before responding. Let me check my schedule first. That brief pause alone has helped me keep my word and preserve the respect of others and of myself. Each day, I also practice observing myself when I'm about to complain, to shift blame, or to prove something. Every time I resist that emotional reflex, I feel a little stronger, and I believe you can too. Stoicism doesn't ask us to change the world, only to master ourselves in every word and action. And through that, our inner world begins to change, steadier, calmer, and more trustworthy with each passing day. If this content helped you reflect on yourself, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next video. Every subscription is a step we take together on the path to self-mastery and resilience. And remember, the strongest person is not the one who speaks the most, but the one who quietly keeps their word, overcomes themselves, and acts with consistency every single day. See you in the next video.